Hello, dear radio listeners and radio viewers. News Radio Լրատվական is hosting its regular program, Business Dialogue. This is our third program already, and during the previous programs we discussed topics on digitalization from the point of view of associations, unions, and the private sector. This time we will consider from the public sector side how to digitalize business, what issues and opportunities there are. I am Samvel Gevorkyan, the founder and CEO of BSC, Business Support Center, and this program will be co-hosted with me by Gevork Bohosyan, CEO of the Impact Hub. And our guest is Gevork Mantasyan, with a very complicated position that I would read now. Consultant and advisor to the Minister of High-Tech Industry on Strategic Industry Relations. How should we call it, Gevork? As a position or positioning of behavior or a status? A job. It is more consultancy work. I am an economist and my major is economy. In comparison with my previous work on Armenia's development strategy, transition strategy, it is important for me now that besides developing strategies, the implementation would take place as well. And the ministries are a part of executive power bodies responsible for policy making, which should later go to implementation and to our society. This is a little philosophical statement, and thus we can start here on talking why we need governments. Yes, so we can start from the question why advisors are needed on the system. Are they listened to or no? This is a complicated work, and the position is very important because there are different opinions, and in this dynamic world, it is very vital to have a dialogue in the government system, where often are internal level conversations which do not go to the public. As far as often there are some developments about which you cannot communicate to the public before they are actually enacted. Thus, specialists with different experience, professional capacities, and even mentality are needed to make it possible, showing different points of view for the decision makers themselves, who are specifically public authority assigned responsible people to have various options and solutions. On practical examples, there was such an institution before, I guess there still is, called public councils and adjunct to the ministries, where people from different public organizations, experts are invited, and where, in accordance with particular procedures and the will of the relevant public structure heads, particular topics are discussed. At times like this is a very good place to periodically discuss and test particular policy-making tools or the impact. For example, one of my scientific topics is the economic impact assessment, and for example, one of my scientific topics which back in those happy times I could get into detailed in my previous academic route is AI, artificial intelligence economic impact assessment influence on political economic institutions. That is not completed yet. It was a very long scientific process with my academic coordinators from the United States. And that I had to sacrifice to get engaged in more urgent issues at those times. Gevork, this project that we are initiating, these three programs, we have a partner here, SAIP, Center for International Private Enterprise, and BSC, Business Support Center, upon request from SAIP, implements business digitalization research, and with this we need to come to particular assumptions here. One of the intermediary results that we have already discovered is that we have this data that only 2% of Armenian SME representatives use cloud technologies. In this dynamic world of technology development, this 2% of Armenian data status, what would be your advice to the private sector in these circumstances? First of all, I would like to thank you for this invitation. We have tuned into conversation very fast now. As you have already noticed, our format here is very flexible and we tuned into conversation as it was very engaging. Once again, thank you for invitation. After long attempts of our meeting finally now takes place, and I hope the radio listeners and viewers will also find this dialogue interesting. As for the question, statistics, this is more likely a conditional estimation, but I think 2% is very low. First of all, let's come from the problem itself. Why we need cloud technologies? First of all, this is a tool, and we at the ministry consider the use and appropriation of technologies as a tool itself. There will arise a question, with what purpose that would be? Competitiveness increase, productivity, and world market enhancement. If this number is 2% going to small economic test, I can assume after this that if there is no aspiration of the entities that are not aware, we have a particular gap here on what could have been done using cloud technologies to have more results. Or the business doesn't simply need that, probably. It competes in an issue where the latter technology is not necessary. I think we have both of increased options in this reality. Some companies perhaps are not informed on the advantages of the technology, and other companies compete in the environment they do not feel the necessity of this technology. Like when, let's suppose, we are going to ride a bicycle and compete like that, we do not need anything more beyond we are self-sufficient like that. Here we can make some assumptions in which direction these companies can go. I do not want to disclose details now, but these topics are discussed when negotiating with advanced technology representing international companies. And as we started talking earlier today on functions of the government, that what it should be engaged in, and I would like to point out the following. I believe that in the 21st century, we will witness many changes, even in 10 years' time, and we will see the changed role of the government, transformed role, also for the enterprises. I do not think that after this period the changes will be explicitly immediately happening, but the government in the scope of its functions should be helping, it should be the helping hand to the private sector. At some risks for the private sector are still unreachable. It is very interesting, Georg, the role of the government from the consultant's point of view. In the beginning, we talked on public councils and the PPT dialogue there. Georg is the pro in that. As I also worked 10 years in promoting PPD, private-public dialogue, and developing the sector, and you realize that everything that is written in the literature works indeed like that. The best and the most efficient way for policy development and policy making is exclusively through the PPD, because public officials who do not get engaged in that dialogue do not listen to the private sector concerns and needs and do not accept statements of the sector. That kind of public policy results to be cut from the reality. Getting back to the topic, Georg, when talking on digital economy from the public sector view, which are the main pillars, the main components that the government considers to drive this 2% into 2050, and why not more? Thank you. I would like to tell a story that would simplify, refer to Georg's statement, why this dialogue is important. There are several management methods for the public sector. The public makes different choices. The most evident is like the one that I would like to mention from experience of Africa, when you compare the age of the young people to the age of the executives. Now we have this situation, about 50% are below 20 years old there, and if I am not mistaken, around 2025 in terms of age, when 90% of the executives and leaders are in their 60s. It's not even about concepts here, but generations difference. At least one generation difference is there. Here, that dialogue is very precisely illustrated in this case. What the first part of it wants, and how the executives understand and are familiar to the issues raised. Of course, we can doubt whether the raised wishes are good or bad, but here the difference of the stakeholder groups in the dialogue is evident from the aspect of generations, age, issues, and solutions. This is an example to understand why the dialogue is important and in what direction to go later. There is always a perception of wisdom and responsibility, which is an important skill already. But that is a separate topic for future conversations, probably. I just wanted to highlight it. Now, what has been ongoing, I cannot disclose details at this stage because negotiations are being held now, but the good news is that particular things are ongoing in this direction. Yes, of course, and that's not a self-goal, actually, at least for me, because it's too valuable to spend time on things that will not bring results. Time is valuable here, in my case as well. And if you are not getting engaged in something you want to result, as you are spending a particular time from your life on that. Whoever has had negotiations knows what I'm saying and knows that at specific times it is vital to voice some things, and at other times to be silent, to remain silent. Some things are still ongoing in the public sector. I would like to say that a lot of things became visible after Artsakh war, the war in Artsakh, when our critical infrastructures were attacked. I am talking about digital infrastructures, and here the role of cybersecurity is vital. When we are digitalizing something, we need to think in what state it is. Actually, I brought a specific example, but cybersecurity is a global issue discussed between different countries. There are different focus groups working in this direction, pro and con. And here, once again, the features of human nature, come up. When you can write with the same pen good things or harm the process, unfortunately. And it's evident that there is a competition for resources worldwide. Different groups make different decisions for enhancing their competitiveness to meet their goals. Consequently, the state by itself, as the main institute organizing public life, is obliged to think about this. If we would afford the luxury of bringing to life many interesting projects, that would be perfect. But every project has a cost, and if you don't consider that, later still you will be the one who is responsible. From that point of view, 5 years ago, what shall our small businesses expect of technological development perspective? if the productivity increase and competitiveness increase starts to go faster. What's your opinion? Because I think and estimate, as a business consultant engaged in this sphere for over 25 years, that number one problem in Armenia is low productivity. If not the main problem, then still one of the most serious problems possibly. In this context, what the business should expect in technological direction the next 5 years? This might seem as an easy issue, but it's actually a complex multi-layer issue. We should understand in general on what niches we should compete in. It is too abstract and dangerous that we are ready to compete in everything, and it's an unrealistic challenge too. And here we have the same necessity of the dialogue. The state can practice it through direct communication or without it, but for sure the strategy is necessary for that. The strategy is a range of activities that can lead to the impossible, but that direction can guide us. The main thing that the business can expect from us is that we will be able to build infrastructures, and the government in its turn should ensure that it will do anything depending on its authority to ensure competitive infrastructures. And again, here in our country, we have the necessity for this conversation. How deep should the government act, and how much should it let the private sector do in this direction? In my personal understanding, competitive, available infrastructure should be created, particularly digital infrastructure, where the same businessman, depending on its needs in the fast-changing reality, should have flexible directions to use and not claim that we have only one direction working. In this case, when your introduction is flexible and multi-layered, you can pass from the one spot to the other. Perhaps this should sound a bit non-concrete, but I think we all understand that what I'm trying to say here. Yes, that is why we will clarify now. We will try to clarify that now. What do we imply saying infrastructure? Internet availability, clearly quality internet. It sounds really good in English. Accessibility and affordability, as it might be acceptable but not affordable at the same time. That the work that the public and on the other hand, from the public management point of view, is whether you have resources. In general, the entire public management system is about how you manage those resources to reach the goals set. And when the goals are formulated, and we know that the particular goals are basic and you know that they should be met, just like infrastructure issue, particularly internet availability as well as public services digitalization. I believe there have been essential changes in that sphere. The changes related to COVID became visible worldwide, and in Armenia as well. For example, that works how many people know about, let's say, e-request. You can electronically submit your request to the relevant authority, and they are supposed to get back to it. This is within those 2% probably. Here there is an issue related to how easy accessible those tools are. That kind of accessibility here is a bit metaphorical. I believe that we have things to do here that come from complex tools to more simple ones. As far as regarding the same e-request, if you do not have an ID, for example, and a card reader, you cannot submit a request. And here we come to the point that this tool to become less accessible to the public, because there are actually few people who have ID cards, card readers, and the most difficult is to remember all the PIN codes. I think with mobile number that request becomes available. No, it's not. I have tried at least 5 to 6 months ago, it was impossible. But still, it's not worth it to mention that only 3 weeks ago, public regulation strategy was approved. And there are very interesting actions related to digital aspect there. I would like to make a quote from our first program, in the scope of which our guest Haik Chobanyan, UAT Executive Director, made. And when we were discussing digital literacy issue, he mentioned that there is precisely the task of the state to increase the digital literacy of the business, and the most resultative way would be that if the state does it imperatively. Firstly, the state has to empower its infrastructure, which with such tools related to business, that the businessman should be obliged to apply tools to be able to use public services. For example, submit reports. Tax system is a very good example of this. When immediately decision makers make decisions adopting our taxation system, it switched to electronical, and I remember that at that period there were many protests on that too, especially outside Yerevan, when people claimed they couldn't use computers, they didn't have internet access. How can we file invoices, they said, etc. But shortly after, like in 8 or 9 years, we see that the system works very well. Of course, every good system has its problems, but those are mostly technical issues now. And to claim that people got deprived of the opportunity to use e-invoicing, that never happened. If you are not providing people an alternative in cases like this, they go and learn how to use digital tools. From this aspect, I would like firstly to ask you whether, to what extent you agree with this statement, that this is the task of the state and the latter can ensure the best solution to this issue. And secondly, there was a provision in the public regulation strategy. In 2 years' time, at least 50% of our public services shall be expected to go digitalized. At this point, if I'm not mistaken, 20% are digitalized, 30 I guess. In 2 years' time, 50% should be reached, and we're on the way, but we're still very far from the level of the government from having these kind of digital tools developed. But naturally, we want to see businessmen applying digital. The question was from 2 parts. I will start from the first, though the second part is more interesting personally to me. We can start from the second. No. I would like to welcome Mr. Chobanyan. We have worked together. What he was saying is when the state takes some leadership, and that is, as I mentioned in the beginning of my speech, related to public policies. In one case, you can make an infrastructure and say, business, hey, business, use it or don't use it. The second is, as a state, you say, I have made it, let me take your hand, business, I will show you how to use it. And I'm happy that you mentioned SRC, State Revenue Committee, in your example as the first here, because the stakeholders there use the most, I didn't know that, perhaps advanced technology and this kind of tools are used there. I happened to be a part of those processes in State Revenue Committee. I am well informed on that, and taking into account the difficulties, I think there have been actually big improvements there, and still more things should be done and will be done. I would like to say in English there is a good wording, digital literacy. It kind of resembles to know to write letters, this process. For example, the state might have decided not to teach people to read and write letters, but it does to make people communicate as well. Use information sources, get knowledge. This is again a good example that these actions are directed at human capacities development, and this topic is aimed at digital capacity development. After all, it has a unique monopoly to force people to do something, establishing rules of the game. In English, that is called enforcement. That is something that we as public accept those rules of the game. We form people who organize our lives. We select them, we appoint them, and when there is no perception of where you need to go and what you need to do. The vision should be led. You undertake actions which form of policy to choose to push that. Policy and politics are the same word in Armenian, and we have not thought of better word yet to originally appoint those understandings. By policy making, you can spread digital literacy better, which I find as an important take, but that is a very subtle tool actually. If you use it all the time, you might damage the branch you are sitting on. That was the first part. The second now. There are several hundred of digital services. I'm not sure if I'm authorized to voice the precise number. That's why I will not go into numbers now, but I will just say about 20% of them are digitalized. And we need to understand that what we call digitalized here. The same ministry may be engaged in formulating digital standards. I will not mention in which public institution this case was, that the PDF file was considered digital document. From linguistic point of view, of course, it's a document which introduces a digital format, but it is a few megabyte file actually, which is not kind of a document in this case, digital document. Thus, which are the digital standards is a difficult question, and that it's an action that has to be performed, and of course there are best practices considered in this too, what to call digital or not, what to call not digital, which have to, this kind of practices need to be approximated, and any engineer knows that when taking a technology to approximate, to apply, there might be problems in course of that process. There is another interesting topic related to this. For instance, we have several hundred public services, and the question is how many of them we actually need to keep. The most popular example is ID, passport ID, birth certificate. When one public institution provides those to you, the other public institution demands from you. You are the state, you have it. If needed, use X source to access that. With this logic, we could withdraw 3 to 4 services, for example. And I would like to mention for our viewers and listeners that we are expecting 50% of digitalization, but the number of the services might decrease. In general, this is an interesting topic on our public institutions, which is one of my scientific direction topics on competitiveness and future of the governments, how it should be and how the states will be governed in future too. This is the topic we started from, and I expected we could come to this during our conversation today. It's an interesting approach, the state in the future and the role of the state in our future, public leadership. We have entered an era of changes and everything is happening in front of our eyes, and when I compare how little were the changes in the times of our generation from the aspect of taking this into account from the point of view of international practice and experience, let's consider this comparison. The role of the state as leadership, Armenia and other countries, comparable ones. And from the other aspect, if there is an initiative and leadership, should it be the state function, or should the state outsource it to some private company or private sector? And where is that threshold? To what extent the government, the state should do that by itself, and from what level after that it should probably outsource? For example, in the United States, Pennsylvania has fully outsourced its public services up to the management of the prisons, etc. Can you imagine? But with our Armenian approaches and mentality, where is that threshold for this kind of drastic change, especially related to SME sector digitalization? That is a very interesting topic, even one for a separate program. We will consider that. Actually, all the topics that we discuss here could become several hours duration programs. It is important to fix here that Georg is ready for the following programs when he is in Armenia, of course. This is an interesting topic, and I would like us all to avoid the trap here. Different countries, states, comparisons. Oh, that's always a good thing, but I personally like them too, actually, but not just to make the comparison, but to see the differences, to understand how to incorporate those. The same process that engineers call adaptation. How they would adapt, which is applicable here. Here is like that and like this. Sorry, that this is too linear and too plain for me. I know Pennsylvania very well, and I like the universities there. I'm thinking of voicing now an example. I mean, why shouldn't I? In Arkansas, for example, state, 9 people are working with SMEs. Can you imagine in that public system? Arkansas, that counts. They are very productive. And if compared with us, we should say we have much more people working with SMEs. The situation is too bad. But let's not forget, these are different societies with different traditions. One example is too linear here, not functional. And here problems arise because people who base on such kind of examples, I consider that a bit manipulative or not realized manipulative, which is a mistake. Manipulations contain threats because they can create expectations, discontent. And that is like Harry Potter illustrated black magic in some way. Now, with this logic, there are no identical countries, even North and South Korea, so when they were culturally and ethnically similar, and they are today in many things still. From the perspective of future governments, it's very important that we form our own, because we are a very interesting nation. And there is no nation like us. We are different too, and that is very good. This is a source of incredible opportunities we have here. There is another question: how can we form infrastructures and available services? By communicating, knowing, and interacting with each other, which will help us reveal our talents and develop those. There are no people without talent, by the way. Another question is how you're going to help everyone find their role and the future public regulation system, in that system, I mean. Very well. I think, Gevorg, this would be my last question. While my personal opinion is that outsourcing issue is the following: if the state does not get involved in solving the issue, or does not have resources for some reasons, that is a good opportunity for the private sector, whatever the sphere might be. In many places, people explain the state doesn't go to this. Well, that's great. Let's find a chance in that. Of course, not related to legislative sphere. There are opportunities when the private sector can get involved. Gevorg, please, the last question. You know, I like experiments a lot. Can we have 3-4 blitz yes or no questions, very, very fast, with short answers? Does the state have a digital strategy approved? Yes. Is the private sector, especially SMEs, are they involved there? Yes. Is there a list of activities? I think so. In that case, let's switch to the topic. If you remember, 1 or 2 more significant activities for business sector digitalization. I wanted to mention that the strategy would need to be revised. In general, strategy approaches have to be revised too. I do not know if this should be started now, or if this should be discussed now at all. That is another topic for discussion. In general, now I would like to say how strategy should be. I think sometimes we don't even need to have strategies, to be honest. Such a provocative statement at the end. Interesting. I agree, and I think it's important to accept the strategies we have and to start to work, because strategies get improved, but due to the activities remain the same, and still more needs to be done. Thank you, Georg. It was very interesting, even though we didn't manage to provide solutions today, but our format is like that. We discussed, analyzed, and considered many things deeply in many layers. That was the best message, not to look at things plain, this idea. I liked it a lot. Looking at layers was the best message, and as they say, it's not important what happened, but rather why that happened. And from the aspect, this kind of aspect, I think Georg will agree with me that this was very interesting. It was an interesting discussion with a good formed agenda for upcoming discussions, radio and other formats. Dear radio viewers and radio listeners, I would like to remind that you were tuned into Business Dialogue program. Our guest today was Georg Mantasyan, advisor to the Minister of High-Tech Industry on Strategic Industry Relations. Georg Pogosyan and Samvel Gevorkyan were in the studio. The programs were initiated by BSC, Business Support Center, and our good partner SIPE, Center for International Private Enterprise. Wishing you all a great day.
Adios. Stay tuned.